Hello and welcome back to another painting tutorial. Now in this new series that I'm looking to set up, I'm going to be showing you how you can paint tanks using a simplified version. Instead of using airbrushes, weathering powders and specialist paints, all I'm going to be using in these is a normal aerosol spray primer, coloured spray primer for the oil painter, and normal brushwork. Now for the first of my series, I'll be showing you how you can paint the British tank camo using this Rubicon A15 Crusader as my subject. Now I'll show you how to paint it entirely using the Army Painter's range of spray primers, brushes and paints. As you can see, the tank has already been spray primed and I've used the Army Painter's Desert Yellow. This gives us a really nice base colour in which to work up from. Now the first task what we're going to be doing is dry brushing over the entirety of the tank, including the turret as well, and for this we'll be using skeleton bone. For this step I'm using my monster brush. This gives us the most coverage over the miniature as we're painting, and I've applied some skeleton bone onto the brush and dried off most of the excess. I'm just going to be running this brush along the edges of the tank like so, just to pick up all of the raised sections. And I'll be doing this across the entirety of the tank and the turret as well. And this will just give us some nice highlights across the surface. You can see here that the dry brush has created this nice highlighting effect across the miniature. It also gives this dusty effect as well, which is perfect for a desert camo scheme. Now the next step is to apply some shading into the recesses, and for this we'll be using soft toning. For this step I'm using my large dry brush, because even though it's a dry brush, it's perfect for a wash because it's small enough to control into the recesses but also big enough to give us some excellent coverage over a large miniature such as this. Now I'm going to be quite liberal in its application. However, I've mixed in a small amount of water just to thin it down slightly. I want to make sure I get it over all of the recesses so that it pools and creates some nice definition across the miniature. Now you can see quite clearly that the wash on the previous step has left almost an ununiform surface across, and this is great because it represents dirt and grime that's built up across the paint scheme on the tank. Now the next step is we're going to be focusing on the tracks. This includes the tracks on the bottom there, and also any additional stowage tracks as well. Now you can also paint some of the stowage at the back as well. I've got various tarpaulins on this particular miniature. It's really up to you what you decide to paint. And for this I'll be using Monster Brown. For painting the tracks I'm using my monster brush, as it's really quite a large brush, gives me plenty of nice quick coverage over the tracks there. And I've mixed about 50% mix of water and Monster Brown because I want to get almost like a wash in a sense just across the tracks. We don't need to worry about it being too neat. We can just apply this across, being quite liberal with the application, and this will create some nice dusty track effects. With the base coat on the tracks complete, we can now focus on the lining of the road wheels, the coaxial machine gun, and also the blade on the spade at the back as well. We're painting all of these areas with matte black. For this step I'm using my regiment brush, as this will afford me a slight amount, slightly more control than the other brushes I've been using so far. So we're going to be carefully painting this onto the areas that we've been painting black. For the next step we'll now be painting any areas such as the handle on the spade on the back there, and also any stowage or boxes that you might have on the miniature, and painting all of these areas with leather brown. So for this step I'm using my regiment brush again, and I'm just going to be roughly going over the areas. These are quite large areas, so I don't have to be too worried about the control. Just making sure I get a nice and even coverage across all of the area. Now before we move on to the weathering of the tank, I would recommend applying any transfers such as these that you might have, or painting any markings onto the tank that you might want to apply. Now once the markings have been applied to the tank, we can now start weathering them. And first of all we're going to be creating some scuffs, and for this we'll be using Desert Yellow. Now for this step I'm using my small dry brush, and I've just got a small amount of Desert Yellow on. I'm just going to be focusing this around the edges of the decals, and this will just create some effects of scuffs of the paint, and also some dirtying of the marks as well. So we're painting this across all of the markings on the tank. So the next step for weathering is to apply some warm washes, and for this we'll be using Strong Tone. We'll be applying this over any of the stowage rolls that we've got on the back there, the tracks, and also doing some targeted effects in the gaps, and also at the bottom there to represent any mud or oil that might have built up on the tank's surface. So for painting oil streaks I'm going to be using a character brush. I'm just going to be focusing the wash around one of these rivets here, making sure it gets around, just dragging it gently down the side there as if it's dripped in the whisk dries, it'll look as though oil has dripped onto the side here, pooled around the rivet, and then dripped down the side. We can use some similar effects across the miniature just by painting into these recesses here, just removing any excess, just basically targeting the wash anywhere where we would expect any grime to accumulate. So the final step for weathering is to apply some scuffs to the edges of the armour. For this we'll be using matte black. For this step, instead of using a normal brush, I'll be instead using this foam, and this is just a packaging foam that you get in most miniature sets, such as blisters for example. Now I've just dipped it in a small amount of the black paint. I'm going to be dabbing this along the edges, and this will create a nice scuff effect along the edges of the armour, as you can just see just there, and I'll just be doing this anywhere where you'd expect damage to occur, such as the bottom of the skirts, like so. So here we have the completed Crusader. Now whilst I've used the Crusader as the model for this particular tank, you could use the same technique on any of the British tanks if you wanted to get a similar desert scheme. So as the tank stands, you could, if you wanted to in the future, add some extra weathering powders. You could add some sand coloured weathering powder into the tracks, for example, to represent sand that's built up into the recesses. Now if you did enjoy this simplified version of a tank painting tutorial, do let me know in the comments below, as I am planning on doing more in the future. Also subscribe to be kept up to date with all my latest projects, and also you can support me from as little as $1 a month by heading over to my Patreon page, which you can find in the description below. So until next time, thanks for watching and goodbye.